right, we've got our next speaker is another M&A firm, our Rob Follows and John Kirkpatrick here.
Hey, Cameron, great to be here with you. How you doing?
Rob, good to see you, buddy. How are you?
Hey,
Great,
Cameron, I'm here too.
All right. Hey, John. So Rob and I first met 13 years ago, 14 years ago now in Barcelona at the YPO Global Leadership Conference. We've become very, very good friends. I've stayed at his home in Whistler. I've hung out with him in Barbados. Rob and his wife, Jenny, are the reason that I moved my company and personal residence to Barbados. And I've introduced a number of companies to Rob over the years as a strategic M&A firm. So Rob and John, who works with Rob, are going to be speaking to us today. Let me just do a very, very quick bio intro, and then we'll let them take over. So Rob Follows is the founder and CEO of STS Capital. Since 1992, Rob has been driven to helping entrepreneurial businesses and owners achieve maximum value when the right time comes to sell. He's a passion for helping people live their vision and wants to help other entrepreneurs achieve full value for their business. Today, Rob is involved with or led over 1,000 M&A transactions with a total transaction value of over $100 billion. Rob's also an extreme adventurer. He's part of an elite group of people who have climbed all of the 7 summits, which is the highest mountain on every single continent. He's also skied the North and South Poles, completed the 250-kilometer Gobi Desert Ultramarathon, and many more amazing achievements. John Kirkpatrick serves as managing director at STS Capital, being a digital transformation pioneer, founding and CEO of an award-winning SaaS company. John now makes it his mission to make extraordinary exits possible. With more than 25 years experience as a business leader, John now uses his broad expertise to help other entrepreneurial business owners navigate successful outcomes in their M&A journey. So they're going to be presenting next. Just a quick show of hands. Who else on the call today has been to the summit of Mount Everest? I didn't think so. Rob, you and John are up. Go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Cameron. Really appreciate the opportunity. I want to say that we have both been in the shoes of sellers and in the shoes of strategic buyers, as have all of our partners at STS. And so we hope that this will be an interactive conversation with everyone. Then you guys will ask questions because of John and I, because this really is about learning how external, just as you guys were discussing, I thought it was a great lead in, Cameron. You were discussing how many people have assets like your friend sending his PDFs out of his prior research that aren't valued by him, but are valued by others. And really that's where the magic comes of selling to a strategic buyer and getting ready to sell to a strategic buyer, where they will pay multiples higher than a financial buyer, first of all, but secondly, we'll find things in your organization that maybe you're not valuing, Rembrandts in the attic, we call them, such that they will pay maybe 200 or 300% of what a financial buyer might pay if you're thinking about getting ready to sell your business. So with that, I'd like to introduce John Kirkpatrick a little bit further. John has been both a seller of his own business and a strategic buyer, having joined 3M after selling his business to 3M and spending over a decade at 3M buying other companies. And so I think John is a better presenter than I am here. And so John's going to walk through, if you're thinking about, or your firm's thinking about getting ready to sell and have some chips off the table down the road or make 100% sale, thinking about how you can strategically position your business with buyers down the road is the way you'll drive value. And so John's going to speak to that, and I'll come back in a bit to present one of the slides. But over to you, John Kirkpatrick, and thanks again, Cameron, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Cameron. Just a quick check. You can hear me and see the shared slide?
Yep.
Slide deck? Okay, good. We're not going to go through a formal presentation, or we don't prefer to do that, but we'll use it as a bit of a guide to make sure we stay mostly on track and offer you additive to your current conversation, which I just love the vibe here. I came in about 10 minutes before our start, and holy cow, the energy is just palatable. I love it. And so many of those Rembrandts in the attic discussions points resonate, you know, whether it's your client base, your creativity, your unique special sauce. That's the thing that takes it to a higher level in terms of what a potential acquirer would value besides just the balance sheet and the financials. So we're going to touch on a couple things that I hope are additive to this, and not only things that you might consider when you're selling or getting ready to exit, but even adjustments that you might make, some tactical takeaways we'd like to leave you with, that even now you can make these adjustments so that your company is more valuable and it's seen differently for potential people that might join your world, or acquisitions you might make, and potentially people that are just so impressed with what you have, they'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Who knows? So just to dive into a couple of things here, we're going to look at some things like what can you do to make your company more attractive to an investor. And we're going to discuss some potential strategies on positioning for a strategic versus a financial buyer or investor, or a national versus an international buyer or investor. We'll look at how to get your business in front of the most qualified and strategically interesting buyers or investors. And we'll talk about, how do you determine what your company is worth in general? I mean, you can do a discounted cash flow and trailing 12 months, and any accounting firm or many accounting firms can give you that. That's not the kind of thing that we really look at. And this is why, we're talking about those intangibles, those Rembrandts, things that really make a difference besides the number. The numbers have to be there, but you can also just have a significant multiple by accentuating some of the things that are incredibly unique to yourselves. And by the way, as we go through this, as Rob mentioned, if you want to ask a question, just drop it in the chat. Our head of partners is Angie on the line as well. She'll take the questions and forward them to us. And the other thing we'll talk about here too is, when is the timing right, perhaps to look at and entertaining the idea of selling your business. So a little bit about just where this advice comes from. So we're global. We're all previous operators like yourselves, but we've done a lot of deals and we've learned from them. And that's the kind of thing we try to convey through advice, as to how you can best refine and make adjustments as you go. But we're global. So when we do a process where we search for the ideal acquirer for you, we're looking at it from as far away as Dubai, Singapore, Amsterdam. We have actually offices. I was just in our Monaco office this spring, and I'm telling you, it really matters that if you're there and you're in contact with the buyers. So what we really do is we act as expert guides. We basically move you from success to significance through selling to strategics. And we won't spend too much time on us right here, but that's our trifecta of how we like to be of service to people. But fundamentally, let's talk about valuation. I know we have a limited time, so we're going to go fairly quickly through this. But when you ask what your company is worth, it's complicated because every private company is different. Private companies are unique by design, and you have to go through a price discovery, which is an iterative and collaborative process. You really are worth what an educated buyer will pay. So the key is to educate them in the right way. And I tell you, one of my favorite things that I do every day is to have see the light bulb go off and say, holy cow, we're falling in love with this company that you're representing. Why? Not just because of the numbers, they'll be very profitable for them, but something else caught their attention, and it's unique to each company, and it's a complex thing, but we're going to touch on a few of these different areas. Fundamentally, there's three key categories that we look at. The market, your position in the market, where you are from a competitive nature, how sticky is your product or service, what's your growth plan. Look, we'll look at the trailing 12 months, we'll put that book together, but the truth of it is that the buyer is looking at the future. The past is only indication that the future is believable. So you need both, but really it's your growth plan. And you really want to consider, when you think timing, not when you're trailing or flat, but when your future's looking really hot. And you really want to think about that, okay, if we can put together a story where we can create a multiple upon that future plan, that's where that market analysis fits in. And then they're going to look at your organization. They're going to look at your team. Some of you talked about how special your team is, your channels, your pipeline, your input and output. Your customer base, strategic partnerships is always a key thing. and that special sauce that you have that sometimes you only know, that you have to bring that to the fore for them to actually see how special your processes are. And then, of course, the financials. That's pretty straightforward. Your growth rates, your EBITDA, your gross margin, but the type of margin or the type of revenue is also very important. Clearly recurring revenue and revenue that you can bank on. We used to say in my business, I was in the digital media space, if we can get them on recurring revenues, we were one of the first SaaS companies out there in our space. And I said, we become a cable company, right? Where you have that customer base that's dependably sending you a check every month. So those are the main three categories that you look at for valuation. The other factors that derive value we find is predictability and the founder not being absolutely required going forward. And of course, the Rembrandts that we talked about. So predictability, I think, is a key one here because you want to have consistency in your process, your operations, and of course, your outcomes. That is a real important piece. The other areas are if your founder is able to be working currently at just advice and strategy as opposed to day-to-day operations, that's a much better place to be. And then your long-term relationships and industry areas with the Rembrandts, that's an important piece as well. Hey, I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions that come from what I've said so far? I'm going through this pretty fast. If not, I'll just keep going.
It's good, John.
Okay, good. So some of the best practices we find is to think creatively. Basically, you want to understand some of the strategic thesis. We call them the strategic value of each thesis, because when you go forward, as Cameron talked about, with the College Pro Painters scenario, you'll find 4 or 5, sometimes up to 10 different core areas of industry that are be interested in buying your company. It could be a supplier, a competitor, a customer, but you want to think about each one of those and from the point of view of the valuation metrics as it applies to them. So you want to be up to date with your industry's trends and the impact of those trends. You want to understand the strategic value of that, but mostly plan ahead of your exit and make those iterative adjustments well before you start getting that inbound and you get teased with some big number. But you really want to even think of it now, say 3 years from, we constantly or consistently have people that come to us 3 years out and say, look, I'm not ready right this minute. I think I'm going to be ideal. And I have several right now that we're going to sell. We're going to fully take to market in 2025, but they've come to make sure we do the adjustments right now so that it's not a rush and they're well thought through and it's proven to do that plan ahead. So
you want to encourage questions. We've got a question here. I think it was Anthony that asked, does STS bring investors or just buyers? And so if you could answer that question, John, I think that would be great. And thanks for the question, Anthony.
And thanks for interrupting, Rob. Because I could just zip along. So we can bring investors to the right situation as well. It's not the primary thing we do, but we have hundreds and hundreds of people around the world that are in that space of investing in companies particularly for growth. We don't necessarily get involved in bringing investment to startups or companies that are in distress. But we have a very robust program we call Roll Up to Sell under our ValueMax program that helps a company. I'll give you an example. Several companies I'm working with are around that 35 to 40 million range. They want the kind of multiples that they'll receive at around 100 million enterprise value or even 100 million revenue. And so we work with investment to help put together Roll Up to Sell. So they might buy 1 or 2 of their competitors perhaps, and the group then go to market as a much larger company, hitting an EBITDA and revenue number that hits even a higher level of satisfaction with the strategic buyers. So hopefully that answers your question there, Anthony. Any other questions?
Thank you, Anthony is saying thank you there, John. Thanks, Anthony, very much.
Okay.
Go ahead, John, I think.
All right, so want to just touch on some of the tactical considerations that you can look at. We just talked about acquiring other businesses, perhaps selling. And by the way, these are considerations that you can do leading up to a potential sell, a potential exit. So you can look at selling off certain business units that might be more just you're keeping because it's sentimental value versus real bottom line business value. You might consider a trimming and refinement of some of your business units. You might raise some additional capital. You might change what that looks like in terms of restructuring your balance sheet a little bit for a lower cost capital. You might consider some joint ventures with complementary companies. And you basically want to look at these sort of things from a collaborative and creative entrepreneurial approach, because the real value to a strategic is a combination of all of the above. You want to have a tight ship, but also one that's very in tune with the adjustments that you should be making in the current environment. So they take into consideration all of those things. The other thing when you do this price discovery that you saw in a previous slide, where you really find out what you're worth from an educated, informed buyer by talking to many different buyers. So some buyers will pay a premium to access your market because they're perhaps in Europe or maybe they're in Asia and they want to get into the U.S. market. They want access to your supply chain and other things like including customer base and so on. So when you're talking to multiple buyers, it can really spotlight those key values, and they'll tell you coming back and say, you know what, what's most appealing is A, B, and C. So having those discussions is very important. And buyers, we've seen, they may disclose their preferred valuation thesis, really, and it changes. Their strategic imperatives change from year to year, and to know what they are really comes through that discovery and what they'll actually pay right now. And we have the saying, the transaction transcends transaction transcends the market. Really, you can have ups and downs in the stock market, ups and downs with inflation and various things, but if you have something that a strategic buyer wants, they will pay, and we're seeing it today as we did 10 years ago. You want to fully understand your Rembrandts in the attic, and understand what your strategic assets are relative, to that buyer, that they just can't resist. They have to absolutely have you for how it matches in with their company. The final thing there was creating a soft auction by those multiple conversations. So this is where Rob's going to come in and talk about selling to strategic versus financial buyers.
Just want to stop and see if there's any questions from anybody before we just try to put the M&A market on one page for you. Does anybody have any questions on maximization of the value of the business, how to get ready to maximize value? Okay, well, think of it this way. So for those of you that like complicated things, Plato said, if you understand something, you can explain it simply. And so we've simplified the M&A world onto one page here. So on the left-hand side, you see all of us are in entrepreneurial or family-owned businesses for the most part. And that is the vast majority of the economy, 75% of the US economy, 95% of Latin America, 85% of Europe and Asia Pacific. And so the vast majority of businesses are private, not the ones that are laid out on the financial sections of newspapers where there's public and they have to share the information. So please recognize that as a smaller private business, you are part of the majority of business in the world. And so very, very important. And so financial buyers, all of Wall Street, if you're in the US, Bay Street, in Canada, the City of London, in London, are run by financial buyers who take advantage of the fact that private business owners are not necessarily clear, or business leaders are not clear on how to position themselves to X. And if something happens And these financial buyers look, you see at the bottom here, death, disease, divorce, disability, disenchantment, or debt, the 6 Ds. They look for the 6 Ds in order to support the buying low to sell high that financial buyers like private equity do for a living. Okay. So they're fundamentally buying low from you as entrepreneurial family led businesses to sell high to what, if we click again here, you'll call, or we call, strategic buyers. And if you can position a business, if we click again, from your entrepreneurial to strategic, you will gain the entire upside that financial buyers actually spend all of their time and money hunting for, positioning themselves for, and spending money on. And so if you were to position yourself directly with strategic investors that private equity and other financial investors are going to sell to anyway, then you're in a position to get 200 to 300% of the value, but also better terms and conditions, get exactly what the management team wants, get exactly what the entrepreneur or other owners want. Now, here's the operative question if you really want to get into creating value. That is, how does your business look to a strategic buyer, if you go back, as they look back at your business from their perspective? So if you look back from the far right, the triangular or the rectangular buyer representing different types of strategic buyers, looking back at your business, what is it they're going to see? What are the Rembrandts in your attic that you're not valuing now because they've been put away forever? Or what technology do you have? What distribution you have? What products do you have? And if you're not sure, you can start with the Value Max program with STS and maybe others, but certainly the STS, to start a couple of years beforehand to understand how and what these strategic buyers are going to value, so that they actually will share some of the upside integrated value with you. That's how you maximize value, through selling to strategics rather than selling to private equity or VC or merchant banks or whatever other financial buyers you might run across. So that's a simplification that I hope is helpful in why you want to understand who the strategics might be as buyers. You might start 2 or 3 years ahead of time and be able to position your firm and your upside significantly above that you would receive from a middleman financial buyer. Does that make sense and hopefully create some questions?
Any questions on that?
Rob, I have a question on the roll up to sell component. How should a company approach the roll up to sell? Is it that you try to buy as many companies as you can for 1x and you're selling for 1.5 or 2? And how do you understand those numbers, or am I missing something?
No, not at all. And so if we used a case history example, and because he's been out talking about it publicly, we don't normally share client names, but Rich Ballett would be someone who was a 50-door Verizon dealer when we met him. And they're now upwards of 2,500 stores. We started a roll up with Rich because he was really hoping to get to $100 million valuation. It was well under a $30 million valuation or so at the time that we started. And we recognized that strategic buyers, by getting out in front of them, and this was one group out of Japan specifically, who had said, look, if you can find us 500 acquisitions, then we would give you the upside of that value. And so Rich started talking to his friends and associates and was looking to offer them, say, 2 or 3 times EBITDA, knowing that we are in the 9 to 11 times EBITDA on the sell side. And many people that are facing death, disease, divorce, disability, disenchantment will sell to somebody that they know that will look after them. If that bid wasn't enough, they would often, this is a currency you can use, offer a part of additional compensation on the sale, Cameron. So when that happened a year or 2 down the road, they would get the money out before he did for an additional EBITDA multiple or 2. And so that's an example of a specific roll up to sell that I hope will make the point that if you've got a platform that's leverageable, that you can bring, ma and pa, 10 door in this case, smaller operators into, where they will be happy to either keep some of the equity to sell later to the strategic with you, but roll into or completely sell to you on, in some cases, future terms, because you'll pay them. You can often afford to pay them twice as much on the sale if they'll wait, and often they will. Those are kind of elements of negotiating, putting together a roll up.
Well, I've heard that, you know, at the 11th hour, it's kind of like the ladder and the roof, right? The buyer will let you use the ladder. You'll get up on their roof and they'll pull the ladder away. And it's kind of like the only way down is to use their ladder, but they start changing all the terms on you. Any advice for people when they're negotiating at that stage, or even negotiating all the way along, and how to negotiate, and how to, I don't know, like, how do you negotiate as the seller?
Yeah, so you have several walls that you can move your ladder to, as using your analogy. And so the way we do that is by making sure that you have, starting off with, say, over 100 potential strategic buyers and narrowing it down to, say, 4 or 5 who are actively interested in the business. And they're actively, as John suggested before, falling in love with your business. And when that happens, and we get an indicative value from one of them, and if you're doing this on your own, you want to get an indicative value from one of them, and then put the others on hold, but let the buyer that you're going with know that they have to have a short due diligence period, a short negotiation period, because the others are waiting in the wings. And it's easier to do that when you have a professional representative like we are, and it's way easier when they've fallen in love. So if you can follow a great process where you get them to where, first of all, it's only, you go to lots of strategic buyers globally, all different currencies, all different value perspectives on the integrated value of the business. So you got all different bids coming in, and then have them work on a soft auction together. So you get the top 3, 4, or 5 who actually are interested in starting into due diligence. Get them as far into due diligence without offering exclusivity as possible. So when you're leaning that ladder on one wall, they know they can't negotiate down without the termination of exclusivity. And so all of those negotiating tactics and strategies come with a professional representative that sells to strategics, not somebody that sells to private equity. Private equity will always push, because they keep 20% of every dollar they don't pay you. So they will always push to reduce the purchase price. Whereas strategics, it's not their money. If they know there's others out there and they can rationalize it, they'll hold the price if they know they're in a competitive scenario, Cameron.
How do you, if you're looking to sell the business, how do you, when do you start talking to the M&A firm? Like, let's say you want to sell the company in 3 years. Is it too early to start talking? Is it in 2 years? That's the first part. And then the second part of the question is, how do you pick which M&A firm to finally engage with when, we're getting hit from 5 different places, right? You got the online guy who can sell you for a cheap fee, and then you've got your friend's company, and then you've got your buddy that you went to MBA school with. How do you just decide who to go with?
Yeah, well, it's really important to make sure. So one of the reasons I started this company is I couldn't find somebody to represent me that I could trust. And so you want to make sure that you can find somebody that first of all has experience in selling to strategics, because you want not just selling to private equity. Secondly, that can explain a process to you that makes sense to you, and you feel good, you trust that they're going to represent you well, that they're not going to be working for the buyers. And one of the counterintuitive areas that comes up a lot in are industry specialists. If I were you and I was choosing an M&A firm, I would not go with an industry specialist, because they are really betrothed to the buyers and not the sellers. And so, Cameron, somebody that you can trust, somebody that understands how to sell to strategics, somebody that you feel, hopefully, that comes to you with a good reference, that you have a good, strong sense is working only for you and not for others in the marketplace that are behind the scenes, like the buyers or other financial players.
Well,
and private
I've
equity
known you for 13 years, and that was the first time I'd ever heard, and it's so counterintuitive, but it makes so much sense. You don't want to work with an industry specific M&A firm, because they really are, as you said, betrothed to the buyers. They have to take care of their industry. They've got all their eggs in that one basket. So they might do well for you, but they really care more about those relationships, because they're going to have to sell another seller to the same buyers too, right?
Yeah, and in terms of your question of when to start, it's never too early, really. Most M&A firms won't help people until they're a few months out. We're willing to start a few years out, as long as the commitment's there on the sell side. And we call that our Value Max program, to work beside clients in the corner with their coach. We're not instead of their coach, we're alongside of their coach to help them make the right decisions to maximize value on the exit a couple of years down the road. And even if it's 3, 4, or 5, often when clients tell us they're going to sell in 5 years, they sell in 2 or 3. When they tell us they're going to sell in 3 years, they sell in 1 to 2. Because once that idea is in your head and you start working towards it, you know, the universal law of attraction, a lot of stuff starts to happen. That's our experience, Cameron.
Okay, last question I've got is I always use the analogy of the Tiffany box. You take like a piece of average jewelry, you put it in a pretty blue box with a white ribbon, and it sells for a lot. And it also is the perception of value. What are the things that a company can do to kind of wrap themselves in the blue box and white ribbon? Is it update their website? Like, are there 3 or 4 little things that just make them look better?
Yeah, so that is a great question. That's a great question. And the answer is different in every case. And so the way to get to the answer to how do you put that extra shine on the business that will bring in an additional multiple is different depending on the strategic buyer. And so the way to do that is start a couple of years ahead when you're not under stress. Work with somebody like STS or somebody else you trust that understands strategic buyers, and actually sign up with them so they're representing you, and then they can get you in front of the strategic buyers and ask those questions. And you can listen on the call, you can be on the call, or you can have the reports brought back. And in that case, you'll see in each different strategic buyer's case what that shiny blue box upside looks like for each of them. And sometimes it's different. And then you can choose which one you're going to target for down the road. I was on the phone with somebody today who was looking at Medtronic as a potential strategic buyer of their orthopedic medical product. They hadn't talked to anyone else. And so our strong recommendation is to get in front of Stryker. They get in front of 5 or 6 of the big strategic buyers. They're not for sale when they get in front of them. They're talking about, are there ways we can work together? But these are smart people on a JV or something like that. Then we get into the conversation. We're not for sale now. We might be in a few years. What do you value, Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. Strategic Buyer? What will you value then?
Wow, that makes a lot of sense, because the reality is it's all in the PR world. I've said that, every business outlet is completely different. You got the Wall Street Journal, and then you've got Entrepreneur Magazine and Forbes Magazine are all business outlets, but Wall Street Journal would want a different kind of packaging than Entrepreneur Magazine would want. And if you marketed yourself as this young, fun, high culture company, that might be great for Entrepreneur Magazine, but Wall Street Journal might think you're the wrong fit then.
Right. And you can decide along the road, what do you want to be then, as you look at what this field of strategic buyers are actually saying back to you. Right. So the research is very real and very time sensitive, and why not be inspired by the actual buyers, and set your strategy up to support maximizing value for them.
Awesome. Love that. John Wensley, you've got a question.
Hey, actually, Robert Wensley here, CEO, COO. So I got a quick question for you. So we're planning on exiting the next 24 months. And from like day one that we launched, literally like the first month we launched, we had a pretty big viral launch, like did almost a couple million the first month. And I got on a call with like a boutique M&A firm like month 1, because I'm building my business to sell. Yeah. So since then, we've been building it. Now we're kind of at the point where we could start working with some of the bigger M&A funds. So like Goldman Sachs is managing my personal wealth. They said, hey, you should talk to our M&A team. I did a call with Goldman Sachs, and their pitch to us on why we should work with them was, hey, all the companies that would buy you, we did their IPOs. So we got the relationships there. We know all the board members. Part of me is like, okay, that's a huge strategic advantage. They can literally pick up the phone and be like, call up the guy on the board and be like, hey, you need to buy this company, or someone else is. Because we're highly strategic. We have data sets that literally everyone needs, that we created ourselves based on user data that no one else in the world has. And now we're training AI on it. So super strategic for a big buyer. They're like, hey, we did all the IPOs for these guys. But on the flip side of it, I'm a little worried, because I'm like, hey, if you've done the IPOs for them, you're also like, they're in your pocket. What's your take on it? How do you judge situations like that? How would you work through that thought process?
Well, first of all, that is a brilliant question. And we'd love to help you with that. You know, in your heart of hearts, who Goldman's working for. It's not you. It's Goldman first.
Yeah, you're right.
You know the answer. You know that. Now, you don't know how it all works behind the scenes, and we do, and we can explain all of that.
Kind of obvious.
Well, no, but I apologize. I don't mean to be, I've been in this world a long time, and Goldman trades for Goldman. They brag about that. And so I can introduce you to YPOers that have sold their business through Goldman, and Goldman's other fund bought it. And they didn't know it was Goldman's other fund, and then resold it a year later for 5 times the value. And so these, I'm not criticizing them, just saying that's the nature of it. They live in a financially driven world, not a relationship driven world. And so they don't, relationships don't matter to them. And so what matters though, is that they do have, now let's go to the implied part of your second part of your question, if we can, if we have time. Is that okay, Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, John,
Thanks for
Rob
the feedback,
follows
though.
in-
I kind of felt that, but it's good just hearing it from an expert. I was kind of like in the back of my mind, like, do I trust these guys? I don't know. It could be good, but hearing from a professional, that really just helps solidify. my
Rob,
gut feel.
I'll do a humble brag from a nonpartisan perspective about Rob Follows. Rob and STS Capital beat out Goldman Sachs on a $2 billion debt offering. Rob, how long ago was this? Like 8 years ago or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why I even remember that is crazy, but like these guys are good, man. Go ahead,
Also,
Rob.
Thanks, guys.
I want to answer your second question. So think about this, and for everybody, if you're positioning yourself with a strategic buyer and you've got something that's highly strategic, imagine being that strategic buyer. Imagine not being on the board, but being the CEO of the strategic buyer or the CEO of the division if it's a massive one. Okay, just put yourself there for a second. And you are driving this business as hard as you possibly can, and you're always looking for new technology, new leverage to make the right decision, the right acquisition, so you look great. That's what CEOs do, right? Or the leaders of their divisions. Now, you and your company come to them. Does it matter whether it comes through Goldman Sachs or Suzy Q? To you, as that strategic buyer, you don't actually care what label it came under as long as they have access and it comes through. You want to know what that strategic purchase is. You get, 10 seconds after the intro, you don't care what label's on it, honestly. Everybody has branding and all of that, but that's actual bullshit. What matters is the quality of the offering that's coming through to the strategic buyer. Think about yourself being that guy, like Cameron's friend, who we worked with at Sprint at one point, very, very busy guy. If he sees something coming in, it doesn't matter which letterhead it's on. They're going to say it does, but it's actually 10 seconds in about the actual deal. And if you've got something that's highly strategic for anybody that's a strategic buyer, anybody that's significant enough as we are in any other mid-range firm would be, you've got to be able to package it well and position it well, and they'll respond. That's their job. It doesn't have to get to them through Goldman.
Awesome. Thanks for the tips. That really helps a lot. Just clarify everything.
And we'd love to help you. We'd love to help you. If we
We'll do a call.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And,
Awesome, Rob.
and to clarify, my friend at Sprint was actually the CEO, Marcelo Claret. Like they're dealing with these big firms, the and good sized mid market as well. Any other questions for Rob or for John?
One comment I'd like to add to this, chime in if there's another question, but one of the things we like to say, there's two things. One buyer is no buyer, so you want multiple people to give you that fallback, and that it keeps everybody honest and it keeps them not retrading their offer. Second, selling your company is different than selling your product or services relative to the blue box, right? When I sold my company to 3M, we had to be GAAP compliant. We had to be our financials in line. We had to have everything to speak their speak. They had 30 MBA types that we had to engage them. And so getting everything positioned from a perspective through the lens of an M&A buyer. Yes, your product's there. Yes, your service is there. Yes, your website's there, but getting everything in line so that it's singing the song they want to hear is the magic, right? And getting it positioned so that we're accentuating the right notes and selling your business the way they want to buy the business. So I just wanted to add those two things.
Thank you, John. I've got a question, and then we can take any final questions before we go to our last session of the day. The question I've got for you, John, is: are you one of the kind of typical STS partners who was running a company, used STS to sell the company, and kind of the Remington deal? I like them so much I joined them.
No, there are several of my colleagues are that. I did not have STS back when I sold my company. I wish I did. We did fine. I'm more of Rob's story, actually, Cameron, where he wishes he had an STS. Hey, we both did well, but when we got in the M&A side with those firms that acquired us, we realized they would have paid more if if we had to run it a process like we do now.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And Rob, just before you got on, I actually explained the Rembrandts in the attic. I didn't realize, I thought it was Andrew Sherman I learned that from. It must have been you over the years that I've learned it from. So I was talking about the Rembrandts in the attic. That's what we were chatting about when you guys came on. Guys, any final questions? Let's all go off mute. Quick thank you to Rob Follows and John Kirkpatrick. Super appreciative. Hopefully one day one of us will bump into you on the top of
Awesome.
them.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.